New Mirarchi in Switzerland towards a European reference architecture for platforms.
Good morning. With this presentation, I would like to talk about the development of a reference architecture framework for platform in construction sector. This point represents one of the main objectives of the DigiPlace project. I am Claudio Mirarchi and I am the leader of the project management activities of DigiPlace. Before starting with the description of the activities that we are working on in DigiPlace, and in particular of the activities of the Work Package 5, that is the one about the development of this reference architecture framework, I would like to start with a small introduction about the context of work in which we are working for the development of this rough architecture. This context represents what defined the starting vision of the project and what we are now using for the development of the work, also thanks to the input that we are receiving with the other work package that we are developing or that we concluded in the DigiPlace project. When we talk about the development of platform, in some way we have to understand how to deal with the knowledge that may be generated with the platform and how to deal with the information and the information flow that may be generated, of course, in the platform itself. So this representation was provided by Nonaka and Takeuchi in one of their famous books, and it represents how the flow of knowledge and of information in different levels of a company can generate new knowledge and reach what can be viewed as a knowledge base for the entire company. So moving knowledge from, for example, this business system level to the team project level, so from the level of business development, let's say, of the company, and to the level of the team project, so where a specific project is developed, we can generate new knowledge because the background knowledge of people involved in the different level of the company is different, and this interaction can enrich both sides of the company and enrich at the end this knowledge base that may be made accessible for the entire company. Unfortunately, in construction sector, we cannot use the schema as it is due to the well-known peculiarities of the construction sector. If we look at the representation of how a project can be developed in construction sector, and we know that this sector is a project-based one, we can see how this business system level is exploded and different stakeholders, that means different organizations, have to collaborate one to each other and to collaborate in a specific project to go defining the project itself, so creating the building, the infrastructure, or whatever in the construction sector. This means that in the generation of knowledge, we don't have an homogeneous knowledge base, but we have a fragmented one, and more, at the end of the project, this fragmentation is moved in different pieces according to the different stakeholders that were involved in the project, then goes working in a different scenarios, in a different project, and with a different group of stakeholders. Now we are dealing with this complexity in construction sector, for example, with the development of common data environment. That means this environment that aims to facilitate the collaboration in a specific project. That means facilitating the aggregation of information and of knowledge in a specific project, but we are also seeing some issues in the creation of this type of environment. For example, if we look at the slide on the left, we can see that if we try to define this common data environment according to the different phases of the project, of course we can deal with the different needs of the phases, but on the other side, it is difficult to understand how to move the information and the knowledge generated in each phase according to the different stakeholders that may be changed during the phases of the project. And this can cause the creation of silos in each phase, and so the loss of information, the loss of knowledge on each phase of the project. On the other side, on the right, we can see how a representation of the common data environment that is able to work on all the phases of the project, that means that is able to create an infrastructure and a connection of different environments according to the different stakeholders, can avoid this type of silos. On the other side, however, it still represents silos in terms of project. So the common data environment is usually defined for a specific project and is not able to combine information and knowledge generated on multiple projects. That is one of the main aims that one company, for example, may have to generate business analytics, to generate work on this side. And you can imagine how this can have an impact when we talk about management of information, management of knowledge at company level, at national level, for example, at European level. So we start thinking about how to deal with this complexity in a different scale that is not just the one about the project, and we have to understand these in the specific context of construction. That means the specific context of products that have to be created in a particular place on the land. So we have to work of something that for its nature is created in a country, and for this reason have to deal with different rules, have to deal with different climate conditions, different procedures, and so on and so forth. So we have to think about a multi-level approach in the development of platforms, and this is why we are trying to work on this side at a European level, and we are trying to understand how to manage this type of levels. And this is, for example, one of the main output that we expect to have in the definition of the strategic roadmap that we are working on in Work Package 6. Starting from this context, now we can enter in the work that we developed in the Work Package 5, and I have to say that one part of this work has been already concluded, and what we already delivered is the deliverable 5.1, that is about the high-level specification for the reference architecture framework, and we are now working on the second task of the project, the task 5.2, that aims to create and consolidate this reference architecture framework in parallel with the development of the strategic roadmap. We can see here what is the highest level objective of the DigiPlace project, and I would like to highlight that we based this objective on something that is called a shared consensus along the entire chain. This is important according to what we said about the management of knowledge in construction sector. So we have to deal with the management information flow, collaboration, of knowledge management from the perspective of all the different stakeholders that may be working around one table that is around a specific project. So we need to work on a reference architecture frameworks that is able to satisfy the need of all the different stakeholders that we may have in this project. And this is why we are working a lot on this context, and we are working a lot to create this shared consensus through, for example, the advisory board of the project, through the community of stakeholders that we are creating, and involving these bodies in continuous workshop, in continuous activities that may help in creating this collection of information and this contamination with the different views that we may have in construction. This is, let's say, the overview of the Work Package 5. As we said, we have this definition of the high-level specification. That is something that we already done, and this development of reference architecture framework. What we obtained from the output of the first point, so the high-level specification, is that we already identified 35 key use cases that will be used in the development of the reference architecture framework, and we identified a main schema for the high-level specification. That is what we will see in this presentation. As I said, we have a division in two tasks in the work package 5. The first one, the high-level specification, and the second one, that is the development of this reference architecture framework. This last one is the one that we're working on now, and is going in parallel with the work package 6, where we are working on the development of this strategy roadmap that will be used to define the possible path that can be followed to apply this reference architecture framework in the European context, considering, of course, the involvement of the different countries in the European area. Of course, the results of work package 5 does not come alone, does not come on their own, but we collected all the information that we obtained from the work package 3 and work package 4. That means the identification of what are, for example, the level of implementation of digital technology, where we deal with the comparison of what's happening in the other sectors and what can be, for example, transferred to the construction one, so that we do not reinvent the wheel about something that has been already studied and developed in other sectors, but of course considering what are the peculiarities of construction one, and then analyzing the work package 4, the needs of the sector, the expectation, and the main barriers that we have in the development of digital technologies in construction, because we have to consider these points to then define a reference architecture framework that can be really applied and effectively applied in the construction context. The methodology that we used in the first step of the task 5.1 is about the development of metrics that has been used to define a list of use cases for the development of the RAF. So the first point is about the analysis of the results from the previous work package, and then try to identify a first list of use cases that have been clustered in main areas and in topics. Then we discussed these points with our advisory board and with, of course, the entire consortium of DigiPlace to try refining these points. And then we activated 5 workshops based on 5 different areas that we opened to all the community of stakeholders to catch new information, and collecting all this information, so the one from advisory board, the one from the community of stakeholders, the one from the partners, we then identified a selection of 35 use cases that we are now using for the definition of the reference architecture framework. The main areas that we used for the development of the working group and then for the cluster, of course, of the use cases are common language, interoperability and standards, rules and regulation, public services, data and knowledge sharing, environmental performance, and business market and collaboration. Each one of these areas has been discussed in a dedicated workshop opened to all the community of stakeholders of the DigiPlace project. Every area was organized in topics, so we have the main area, then for each area different topics, and for each topics a list of use case that was an open list that can be enriched, that can be described according to the different inputs that we received during the analysis in the project. What we obtained at the end is that we synthesized all the inputs received in the discussion, the one with the advisory board and the one with the 5 workshops with the community of stakeholders. We identified the main trends and topics that we have to address, and we tried also to define a list of priority about the different use cases that we have. And then in the end, we obtained this selection of 35 main use cases or key use cases that will be used to define the reference architecture framework. This is the list that we had about the different areas. I will be quite fast on this point, but just to understand what we discussed together. So we have, for example, in the area 1 about common language, interoperability and standards, the points about, for example, the access to the standards, the use of the standards, how to create contracts, and so on and so forth. The important point is that all these use cases that you can see here, so and of course all the topics have to be intended as topics and use cases of the platform. So it's not about, for example, the development of the standard in the table of the standard bodies, but it's about how we can use, how we can imagine the access to the standard through the platform. And this is the approach that we use in the development of all these topics and all these key use cases. Here you can see all the lists that we have. So we deal with, for example, topics about building permit, about public procurement, building logbook, about the development of cadastre, land register, and territorial digital twins. For example, in the data knowledge sharing, about how to share best practices and innovation patterns in construction, so how the platform can be used to share this type of knowledge on the entire sector, and so on and so forth with the different areas that we have. So this is one of the main output that we see that we reached in this first area, and the second one is about trying to understand how to integrate all these different use cases in a matrix of technologies and on relation that is the one about DigiPlace. So we identified 4 main focuses for the DigiPlace architecture, that is the focus about language, the focus about rules, market, and product and services. And for each one of these, we try to articulate different technologies and different approaches that resulted in this mind map that in some way synthesize all the different areas, all the different points that we have to analyze, that we have to study, and we have to integrate in this reference architecture framework. Starting from these 2 main points, so this mind map and the use cases scenarios, we started identified high-level specification, that means some graphs that can represent how the platform may work. So you can see on one side the scenarios that we studied, and on the other side the relation between these scenarios and the use cases that we identified. So here you can see an example of scenarios that we developed. For example, the integrated rule scenarios that aims to represent how the platform can work with the development and with the integration of rules in different countries to provide services to the stakeholders and, for example, reduce the barriers between the working in different countries in the context of in the European context. And the same is about the integrated design process and all the different scenarios that you have seen in the previous list. So we try to define this list and define these scenarios, and this one will be used to create this diagram in the definition of the reference architecture framework. Going on, the RAF will be identified as a different type of guidelines that will be used by the industry for the development of platforms in the European context. So just to close, what we have to look in this high-level structure is that we have to deal with different points. So we have to deal with, of course, the standard on both sides. So we have to respect and integrate the standard, and we have to provide services about the standard, and we have to deal with both the sides of construction sector, that means private points and public points, considering the trends in the idea of these public big data platform in the European and at national level. Finally, these one are the key topics that we are working on in the development of the reference architecture framework. To have some examples, so interoperable product database, the European big data platform, easily accessible BIM and collaboration toolkit, especially for small and medium enterprises, and, for example, ensure the level of interoperability between proprietary platform and fair competition, and so on and so forth. So you can see how here we are trying to integrate the different points that we identified, and one really important is the integration of the already existing project, for example, levels in the context of DigiPlay's reference architecture framework. So I hope the presentation has been interesting, and thank you very much.
Hvala lepa, grazie Claudio Mirarchi, buongiorno da Maribor, buongiorno da Slovenia, grazie per la presentazione, thank you very much.